if you're a creative person, you can be your own worst enemy at certain points, because, you're chasing something that doesn't exist, whether it's perfectionism or everything has to be just right.
I'm Robin Johnson, this is Yours for the Making, and I'm joined by Matt Hurd from Beaucroft Watches of Cambridge, nonetheless.
As the designer of that product, it's a responsibility in some ways to design something that is going to hold is going to last, is going to survive that period of time, is going to kind of epitomise what the buyer wanted it to be.
This show is all about the makers, whether it's art, food, woodwork, metalwork, whether they're craftsmen or hobbyists. This show is all about making.
Like you were saying about making mistakes with getting things out there, I can go round and round designing the thing and prototyping it, being really careful with the sample. But it's not till that's been on someone's wrist for thousands of hours that you really start to test the design, the engineering, the mechanics of it.
I'm Robin Johnson, this is Yours for the Making, and I'm joined by Matt Hurd from Beaucroft Watches of Cambridge, nonetheless. Matt, thanks for coming in.
Oh, my pleasure, mate. Great to be
Looking at
here.
these watches, let's dive straight in.
Yeah, please do.
Because they look incredible.
Yeah, grab whichever.
So, tell me about, oh my God, look at that. That's like a weighted thing, and you can see all the cogs and stuff. This is craftsmanship at its finest, isn't it?
Well, thank you.
How did you start making watches?
Well, I trained as a designer, so I always loved the way things are made. I always loved kind of the connection that you have with the objects that you own and that you interact with. And I spent the first sort of 15 years working on everything from hairdryers, coffee machines, medical devices, toothbrushes, all those things for many different brands, but a lot of things that were very kind of the moment, throwaway. Lots of injection molding, which is great, but nothing that really lasted or nothing that told a story for an individual. And I think I've always liked the sort of personal, emotional connection that you get with products. And for me, nothing kind of does that more than watches. I always think about sort of having my one of my granddad's watches, having never known him, and always felt like I had a piece of him, a piece of his history, even though we'd never met. So in my spare time, I'd always be looking at dabbling with watches, seeing casework, 3D printing things, just kind of coming up with a few custom pieces that I could enjoy to celebrate different things. And then, back in 2020, when my daughter was born, it was one of those things where I realized I didn't really enjoy what I did. I realized I wanted to create something that I enjoyed, that was meaningful to me. So just kind of made the jump to do it, really. And, it's like when you work for a more sort of in the more corporate world, maybe before that, I was doing less and less design, less and less making things, less and less interacting with people. It was more managing a budget, a spreadsheet, clients' expectations. And I wanted to get back to physically creating something meaningful for the buyer.
But I've known you a while.
You have known me a while.
I've known you since your postgraduate, uni days.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I remember talking to you, it must have been 2017, and you were talking to me about watches then.
Yes.
And about the movement and everything else. And I was fascinated then. And then to watch those conversations and those kind of initial designs that you were doing it on the side. But a little side hustle, whether I'm allowed to say that. You're not employed anymore by now.
No,
so it was started as a side venture, really, didn't it?
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's one of the nice things about it starting as a side thing is you just got complete freedom with it. A lot of people I speak to always say, did you jump ship and just quit your job and start the business? And I didn't, and I think I'm so glad I didn't, because it just gives you that. It was almost like my creative release in some ways, to do something after hours that was truly mine and something that I could just explore and enjoy. And as you say, it was many years before we launched our first range where it was just kind of enjoying the craft of it and creating some early designs.
And then tell me about those early days.
Yeah.
You're making the early designs, you're making the sketches and stuff. I mean, you don't make these watches yourself. You're not a watchmaker in a little factory.
Probably
kind
for
of
the
putting them
best.
together. but you get made elsewhere.
Yep.
And what I always think about with watches is like, how are they? I mean, they're so intricate. How are they made? And how do you select who's going to make your watches? And is it an amalgamation of a lot of different bits coming in from different places and then all assembled somewhere, or, you know, what's it all about?
It is. And I think it is an amalgamation of lots of parts coming from different specialists. So, you know, for these watches here, we have a separate dial maker, a hand maker, the people that craft the movements and the mechanics, the strap makers. Everyone's kind of a specialist at their own thing. And, you know, coming from a product design world, as I said before, a lot of things being injection molding, going into the world of making, you know, sort of miniature mechanics and looking at the intricacies, it's a very different world and it's a very different skill. And a lot of it's, as you say, hand finishing. So hand polishing, hand brushing, you know, all those finer details. A lot of those are still done by hand. So for us, a lot of it was going and seeing the people and seeing the quality and seeing the control and the care that people have. And one of the things that was important to us was to have everything assembled in the UK. So we have a team based in Reading, and they hand assemble everything. They do all the quality control. They do all the testing. One, it's nice because you can go and physically see it, or I can sit at the bench and assemble the first one in the range, which is quite a nice thing to do. And it also means that you can be, you know, there's someone that you know by name and that you've got to know and know really appreciates the quality that's been the last person to handle that product before it then comes to you. And as you say, it's the human aspect that I really like about it. It is still someone hand filing down a few of the components, checking the fit, taking a little bit more off, checking the fit of that. Like there's still that craftsmanship about it, which I really enjoy. And you know instantly when you go to a factory and it's not right, you know, you can just tell with the quality.
I completely agree. And it's actually what a lot of people say, that outsource certain elements is you walk into a place and you know pretty much straight away if it's the place for you. I've had other guests on that get stuff made overseas, and you know, the kind of range of success in terms of the stories and the relationships is quite broad. You know, I've talked to people who have gone into a factory and an agent's put them in contact with someone and they've gone in, the price is okay, nightmare. And then they found someone that's really good, a good trusted partner. And I think it's about finding that. We find that a lot here, you know. We'll tender for loads of different jobs across all kinds of sectors. And it's the moment when the client walks in here or the designer walks in here, we know if we're going to work with them or not. They know straight away if they're going to work with us. 9 times out of 10, they'll want to. But for the 1 or 2 that come in and go, no, that's not for you, whether we're too big or too small, whatever it is, it's actually a really good way of weeding out the clients that you don't want to work with from a manufacturer's point of view. So from a client perspective, I can fully relate.
Side. Yeah, you're so right.
And tell me about movements, because I remember the first conversations that we were having about watches, you were telling me about the Swiss movement. It needs to be Swiss.
These aren't actually Swiss.
Are they not?
So I've changed.
I've
changed by June. So these are actually Japanese movements that we use. And it was one of those things like you were describing with manufacturers. I think we, as a small brand working with a Japanese company called Miyota, I think we met them at a few shows and we've seen their sites. And I think it's that gut feel again. I think for a small brand getting into the industry, they really champion that and they really make it kind of accessible and you sort of maximize the quality for those sort of watches and that sort of price point. And again, I think it's, you know, Swiss is incredible. We have some designs in the works that will have Swiss movements for the future, but it's a different sort of, different way of working, different sort of model. A lot of Swiss companies are very for Swiss, like it's quite a closed thing. And, you know, you have to be a certain size and certain order book to get almost into the door in some ways. But we've loved working with the Japanese.
Have you been over there? You've been over to the factory?
I haven't been over to the factory. I've been to see a few sort of smaller factories that they've got in Europe, but no, not yet. I would love to.
It's always interesting. I read a lot of stories about people who do business all over the world, and I read Shoe Dog by Phil Knight.
Oh, yes.
Have you read it?
I have read it.
It's brilliant. Yeah. But the story about, you know, how he interacts with the Japanese and stuff. Yeah. Really, really interesting.
Yes.
And I always think if you're going to take that leap and start doing business with people overseas and stuff, I think, wow, it's all of that culture difference and almost a culture shock when you get there that you think, wow, is this going to be achievable, and are the associated risks worth the reward? I guess so far so good.
Definitely. And I think one of the nice things about the culture there is I think once you build a lot of loyalty is a big part of that culture. And I feel like everything has been about building something together, building something long term. And that's exactly what you want, right? Fantastic. You want to invest in that. And in terms of sort of the technical side, what attracted me on that side is the slimness of those movements. So I wanted something that was kind of, when you put the watch on the wrist, you barely notice it when, it's not kind of distracting you. But when it does, it's for all the right reasons. It's got that bold pop of color.
It looks great on your wrist as well. Thank you. And the color is quite spectacular.
Color's a big thing. I think I was asked recently what are the sort of three things that kind of define our brand, and the first one for me is elegance. I think if you're going to buy something, put something purely mechanical on, it's usually a conscious, purposeful expression. I think why not make something elegant, something that's had all those little details thought out. But the second one is definitely color. I think so much of British design is that blend of kind of classics and tradition with bang, a burst of color and impact and personality. And that's really what I try and create, is the blend of those two worlds, that kind of very classic, but also very sort of modern, bold expression.
As I've watched your brand grow from a fledgling idea, essentially, it's very evident that you really lean into the Britishness. Mm-hmm. You're based in Cambridge. Mm-hmm. That's what everyone in the States thinks England is all about. Cambridge and London and Oxford, we go rowing and everything else. But because you're based there, you're really leaning into it. And I think it's fantastic to see, because it gives your brand a real grounding, but also a real sense of heritage and identity, particularly for a fairly new brand. You've already got that heritage. You're growing that identity. And I think that's really admirable, actually.
Thank you. I mean, it's nice to have a home that inspires you. Like a lot of our early conversations, maybe those first few years where it was just an idea, were wandering around the old town in Cambridge and, walking and chatting about what it could be. And a lot of the early design touches and sort of signature details are taken from what we've seen, whether it's one of the bridges in Cambridge, which actually forms the curves of this case, is modelled off one of the bridges, that kind of very sweeping, continuous curve, to some of the details that form our logo, form other aspects of the watch, are taken from things we've seen. And I think, as you say, it's about kind of building heritage and kind of giving yourself a home. What I love is when people come to Cambridge and come to visit us and kind of associate those two things together, associate our world with Cambridge.
I saw a guy, actually.
Oh, yes.
Last week on Instagram, come over from America.
Yes.
Just to buy a watch. But Cambridge, look at this. I thought, you know what? That is a USP if ever I saw one.
Yeah, was it the one on the river?
Yeah.
If in doubt, always. Well, on the river.
I mean, why not lean into it? You've got it there. It's
exactly.
At your disposal,
It'd be rude not to, wouldn't it?
I mean, another thing as well that I really love about the watches was this one. This was a collaboration piece. Whether you can see it at home there. It's fantastic. It's really subtle, but at the same time, when you look at it, you're just kind of drawn in. It's a classic shape of a watch, but it's got something incredibly modern within it. Tell me a little bit about that. Yeah, I'd love to tell you about this.
So there's a friend of mine, Tim Gresham, who's an artist. He does a lot of street work, does a lot of print work, and I kind of knew him quite early when I moved to Cambridge from the South Coast, and he was always impressed by his artwork and his use of color and abstract geometries. And he does a lot of murals, and there's a few in Cambridge. And over the last, I don't know how many years, I've walked past one of them and thought, if you could cut that out, that would look so punchy, so good on a dial. So we've been waiting for kind of a reason to work with him for a long time. And we had a show in London, a British Watchmakers Day. And we thought, actually, let's do a special edition. Let's combine that kind of world of modern art and watch design and create something, as you say, that has still those classic elements, but has something quite striking and quite modern and interesting about it. So this dial is just made from a few distinctive shapes, and we want it to be almost like a blank canvas, like a white canvas with this metal component, which really is that pop of color, and it is actually pressed into the dial as a separate metal piece. So it has that little bit of depth to it. It has something where when you tilt the watch, you can really see the details of that.
It's almost
artwork.
iridescent, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's sort of hand painted, so hand airbrushed in first with the underlaying sort of vivid blue, and then that purple is bloomed over the top, so it really has that lovely transition to it.
Nice.
And and then that's all assembled in Reading to get those different layers. So a really fun piece, and I think that's what's so nice about having your own thing, is you get so inspired by other creatives like yourself. I'm still waiting for us to have a shop so that you can
we'll come fit out for you. Well, one day. I'd certainly love to.
But just being inspired by others and thinking, how could you marry that craft to what we do? And I think that's what was so fun working with Tim, was being able to give him a watch dial as his canvas when he's used to working, on the side of a building. Now, what can he create in a 33 millimeter circle?
Yeah, I mean, it looks great as well, and it sounds like a really nice way of working with like-minded creatives who you respect.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's nice is it's both my world and his world were interesting to each other. Like I've always loved art. I've always loved the way that he creates his art, and he's always been interested by the intricacies of something at that scale. So it was a perfect kind of collaboration in that way. And he's the most laid back guy I've ever met. So the easiest person to work with.
Oh, brilliant. It's really good, and it looks fantastic. Now, it's Beaucroft is you and your business partner.
Yes.
How did that meeting take place? Were you working together originally?
No, not at all. So I was actually looking for a watch for my brother, and my brother has special needs, so he has autism. So he's not really very materialistic, like physical things, fashion. It's not really his game, not really his thing. But I wanted to get him a watch for his 21st. And I didn't know that much about watches at the time. I had a few fashion pieces that I'd bought. I had a few things I'd inherited. But I found out from my wife that her best friend's partner dealt in watches and bought and sold vintage watches. And that was Karen. So I got talking to him, and he helped me find a watch for my brother to kind of celebrate his birthday. That's now the thing, that if there's a special occasion, my brother will get that out. He'll polish it. He'll put it on, and it's kind of that connection between me and him. Again, another thing that made me realize the kind of power of watches. And from that point, Karen and I just got to know each other, became those really boring guys whenever the four of us would meet up, and we'd be in the corner just talking about the nuances of watches and design. And so we spent so much time together doing that we thought, let's just do something ourselves.
And how does that relationship work? Are you the principal designer and
Yes.
Karim's almost the business manager then?
Yeah, absolutely. So his background is in building businesses, building brands. And what's quite nice is he's quite big picture, whereas I'm, as you might imagine, a lot more in the detail. So we can pull at both sides. He can push us towards the bigger goals we want to get to, whereas I can ensure that, all of the details that really matter and the design and the customer experience kind of is where it should be.
That's really important. And
yeah,
it's quite interesting that when I speak to people that are creative, they've quite often got a driving force of a business manager or something like that in the background. And I've also spoken to people who are very creative and don't have that kind of business manager, that drive, and they're like, well, you know what, I just, had a friend on previously, Andy. He's an artist, sensational musician, got paid to record an album, recorded this fantastic album, in Stockholm or somewhere like that with orchestra and everything else. Came back, listened to it and thought, oh, that's not really me. And then just kind of tapered off, didn't really chase it and didn't follow it off. But, if he had a business manager cracking the whip, he probably could have really gone somewhere. I mean, you look at anyone that's successful, the creative or the performer or whatever, they've always got someone in the background who's kind of driving it forwards.
So true. And I think if you're a creative person, you can be your own worst enemy at certain points because, you're chasing something that doesn't exist, whether it's perfectionism or everything has to be just right, to the point where you may never just put anything out.
Yeah.
And one of the big things, as I'm sure you find, is getting something out there and learning is so important.
Yeah.
Putting something out there, getting other people to interact with it and express the good, the bad, the ugly about it, and learn and build is everything. And I think if I didn't have Karam, I would go round and round in circles a lot more with the designs and kind of just be endlessly iterating and trying to make it better, rather than getting it to a point that you're happy with, getting it out there and then improving and kind of keep going.
Well, it's feedback, isn't it?
Definitely.
You know, constructive criticism is a really good way of learning.
Yeah.
And making mistakes is probably the best way of learning.
Made many of those.
Yeah, well, we all have. But it gives you the most valuable learning, and the biggest lessons are often learned after a mistake, because you definitely don't want to do that again. If you feel that mistake with pain, that pain is a really good way of ensuring that it doesn't happen again.
Very true.
Whereas I say to a lot of the guys down here, like, I don't mind if you make mistakes, as long as you're accountable for them. You tell us what's happened, we solve it, and then you don't do it again. That's fine, you know. And it's really important to do that, because without those mistakes, those kind of sticks on the track that are there to trip you over, without those things, if you just have a linear path of learning where you go from A to B and you know what you're doing, you don't know what you're doing, and then you know what you're doing without any problems. I mean, A, impossible, but B, you're not going to know what to do if you are in a situation where there is a problem. If you haven't had to solve these problems by making these mistakes in the past, I think that's a really difficult position to be in if you get to that end point and you haven't had to deal with anything yet.
I think those stepping stones where things have gone wrong kind of make you anyway, or make the business.
Yeah.
I've always been so aware with like a product like this that kind of semi-daunting but exciting thing that someone might wear that for like 20 years or more.
Well, you're a custodian. With a good watch, you're a custodian, aren't you? I mean, I pinch from somebody else's marketing, but when you own a watch, a nice, elegant, expensive watch, you're a custodian. You're keeping it for future generations. Like your granddad, you got your granddad's watch now.
Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure I've got a granddad watch at home as well from my granddad, and it might have even been his dad's watch. Thinking about it, it's a very classic, you know, black leather strap, brass or gold face. Little Roman numerals and stuff, classic sort of watch. I don't know a lot about watches, but I've got a good, interesting story for you in a minute. But you're a custodian. That's going to be passed on for generations, you know.
Exactly. So I think you, as the designer of that product, you take that really seriously. I think you're kind of, it's a responsibility in some ways to design something that is going to hold is going to last, is going to survive that period of time, is going to kind of epitomize what the buyer wanted it to be. I remember when I had a few £100 when I was like early teenager, and I wanted to buy a watch with some money my nana had given me, and I bought this awful fashion watch. It was foul, and it a year later it was out of style. I didn't wear it anymore. I didn't like it. The battery had stopped. It just, and it kind of ruined the whole kind of point of buying that to signify something important. So I was always very aware to kind of the responsibility of designing something that may carry that weight for someone. And like you were saying about making mistakes with getting things out there, you know, I can go round and round designing the thing and prototyping it, being really careful with the sample. But it's not till that's been on someone's wrist for thousands of hours that, you know, you really start to test the design, the engineering, the mechanics of it.
And what's the feedback been like from the first watches to the watches that you're making now? Has there been a feedback loop, and have you made little changes and stuff? Yeah,
so many changes. I think, you know, whether it's identifying if there are any weaknesses, you know, you hope people don't drop their watches, but if they do, you want to make sure that, you know, if there's anything in there that's weaker, you want to fix that. Little things like just legibility, people wanting, you know, designing something. Our first watches were very dressy, like proper dress watches, but we found our customers really enjoyed wearing them, so wanted to wear them all the time. So it's then how do you kind of ruggedize, still have something elegant, but ruggedize it so that if someone wanted to smash this about and wear it every day, they could. It's those sort of things. And I think, as you said, with your customers being custodians, like a lot of our first customers are still our best customers. Like they've come on the journey with us. They've got to know us over the last 5 years. And they're very quick to give feedback, which is great because they're part of that kind of family that you've built in some ways.
The story I've got about watches, I'm not massively knowledgeable about watches, but I know a few brands, you know, like probably every male in the 40s knows a couple of watch brands. But I've got a friend who split up with his partner, bought a house out in the sticks, and was trying to furbish it very cheaply.
Right.
Went along to an auction house, going to go and buy a load of secondhand furniture, you know, bed, dressers, whatever. Was in the auction house, sat there. He'd bid on a couple of things, you know, a dresser, a chest of drawers, an old bed. And he sat there and he opens the auction house booklet, and he sent me a message. He said, "Do you think this is real?" And it's like an A4 printed booklet that you couldn't really see the pictures and stuff. And at the front of the auction house, a proper country auction house, not online or anything like that. At the front of the auction house, there's a little glass cabinet and there's a watch inside. And he said, "Do you think this is real?" And he texted me a picture of it. And I said, "Well, it looks like a watch to me. I don't know what it is." He said, "Oh, I think it's real." I said, "Well, I mean, it looks like a watch. It probably sounds like a watch when it's ticking. So I'm going to bid on it." I was thinking, what? You buying furniture for your first kind of like bachelor pad since your divorce? He's like, "Yeah, no, but this is great." Anyway, so I'm WhatsApping him live in the auction.
Yeah.
He said, "Right, the watch is coming up and a bid on it. 250 quid he won this watch for." And I said, "Oh, that's great. What is it then?" He sent me a picture of it. He'd won a genuine Patek Philippe Nautilus.
Oh my word.
And this watch, right, apparently he spoke to the auction house and stuff. They'd done house clearance, or someone had done a house clearance, and the whole thing was a house clearance. No paperwork with it, nothing. He took it into Patek Philippe, and they said, "Yeah, it's a genuine one from whenever, 1990 or whatever it was." And he said, "Yeah, it's one of the earlier Nautilus ones. It was one of the first ones they did that was really kind of big and popular." They valued his watch on site 90 grand, just like that. Can you imagine?
That is amazing.
And that piqued my interest in watches. So I was thinking, because I've been going to a lot of auctions for the traveling auctioneers and stuff. And every time I go, I'm like, "Oh, is that? What's
Have you
that?"
bought any?
I haven't yet. There was a Rolex that came up that I really liked, but I'm not allowed to bid on the auctions that we're part of. You know, if there's an auction going on the day before or later that day or whatever, then I can bid on it. But for legal reasons, I can't bid on the auction that the traveling auctioneers are part of. And unfortunately, this one watch out of the whole selection that was there was in that same auction, and it didn't go for a lot. And it did make me think. Actually, I reckon there's a good business in going around auction houses if you know what you're looking for.
That's
Same as anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
But buying watches and jewelry at auction houses and reselling them, I think there's probably good money to be made there.
I think you're right. I think as well, if you know someone that can have a look at it, inspect it, like Karen and I were talking about this not that long ago, that we've got a watchmaker. So we've got someone that you could buy a piece and have a look and assess what would need to be done to get it in good shape. So
we actually designed a shop in Paris for a watch reseller. They're quite a big brand now. I think they've been bought out by a huge luxury brand as well. But their whole business model, it was almost like a pawn shop. You know, you go and you sell your expensive watch, you have all the paperwork with it there, and then they just buy it and resell it for huge markup. And they went from like 3 guys in Kent in an office. Yeah. Well, so the stories go anyway. 3 guys in Kent in an office, and now they've got a worldwide brand reselling watches. And we designed a shop for them in Paris, really elegant street in Paris, big area and stuff. I was thinking, well, there's can't be that much money in selling secondhand watches, but there really is.
Business, definitely.
What is the value of a watch, though? I mean, obviously the design and everything else, but why is there such a huge range from a couple of £100 to like hundreds of thousands of pounds?
Yeah, so I think when you're looking at that real top end, the hundreds of £1,000s mark, I feel like it's not until you get to see behind the scenes where you really start to understand it, and you see the number of people, the number of hours that are going into crafting each of those parts that goes into that watch. And I think that's one of the things that's quite incredible about it is obviously you have precious metals and you have things that have inherent value, whether it's gold or platinum or those sorts of things. But when you're getting into the real complicated watches, the real complications as they call it, it's sheer number of parts or sheer number of ways in which that watch is able to tell the time mechanically. So if you think about a watch that not only tells the time, but it has a world calendar on it, and it can tell the time in many different time zones. It has a special mechanism in there so that it keeps accuracy, as close to perfect as it can, despite the orientation. So everything is on its own axis, kind of rotating in its own way. Or it's also doing the phases of the moon. It's those sort of things. If you think about how many little cogs and gears would need to work together to do those different functions, it's incredible. So I think there is that inherent value of the number of parts and the fact that they've all been handmade, hand assembled, hand put together, combined with precious metals, and then that kind of prestige element really comes into it. So one of the nice things about being a small brand is you can do fairly limited small runs. So you can do something where you just, like this piece, we made 75 of these, and then it was done and it was gone. And there's something quite nice about having that thing that it's an expression and it's out there and then it's gone, and that obviously carries value with it. So you do get that kind of limited number to it, and it's always finding that sweet spot between something that makes it more special and valuable to someone, but also allows you to continue to make it into a business for you.
It's like a timestamp, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
You made them 75 this year. Yeah. That's where we were as a business, as a brand at that time.
Exactly.
That's what the world was like as well, to a certain extent. Sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like the watch you were describing, the Nautilus, and that, whether it's the prestige of the designer, Gerald Genter, that created that watch back when he did, and all of that sort of human connection of having this designer's name behind it, or if it's, what pieces of history that watch was entwined with, compared also obviously with the prestige of Patek today and all that goes along with that. There's so much nuance in it. And what's nice is watches and the style and designer watches come back in and out of favor and fashion. So when we're looking for, inspiration, sometimes we'll look to vintage watches and we'll look right back to sort of the 60s when, like you find with car design in the 60s, there was so much more curve and sort of elegance to the way that things were made in some ways. And it's kind of, that's one of the nice things about being in this. You kind of can draw inspiration from a number of different eras and people to provide different values.
And do you make any watches with extra complications yet? Not
yet. So all of our watches so far are time only, but we're just starting to look at adding those in.
And in terms of man hours involved as a percentage, say, if is there almost a rule of thumb that for every complication you add, you're adding 10% onto the cost or the labor or whatever?
I don't know if there's a direct rule like that. I think one of the things that's inherent with what we do is obviously a lot of our stuff is focusing on kind of that aesthetic design of the piece and the way it sits and the way it wears. The movement is one of those, for instance, is one of those movements that has been refined and refined and refined over so many years. So it's kind of, you're finding this sort of highly tuned engine at the end of its kind of refinement. And so in terms of reliability, usability, serviceability, it's great. So it's kind of exactly what you want for that style of watch. These kind of master complication side of things, that's where it's all kind of the craft and the finishing for the sake of being part of this elaborate, creation in some ways. So I think a lot of the world which we dabble in with those sort of mechanics are those highly tuned, things that maybe were first designed 100 years ago, which again is something I like, that you've got this engine almost in your watch that has a history, has a heritage to it.
And how do they actually tell the time? What is if you really boil it down to the base mechanics,
sure,
how does a watch know what a second is?
Right. So a watch like this, like you were looking at, so this is automatic mechanical watch. So right in the heart of that, you have a spring called the mainspring. So that when I physically wind the watch, or I'm moving my wrist, which is turning a rotor and coiling that spring, that's what's providing the power. And then
that's what that is.
Yeah,
I can see that moves almost so that's gyroscopic action.
Exactly.
That's actually tensioning the spring.
That's exactly that. So when someone says a watch is automatic, what it really means is it's automatically winding itself as you're moving your wrist throughout the day. So that will have a 42-hour power reserve when it's fully wound, which will keep it ticking for about 42 hours. So all the gears and the mechanics are effectively releasing the energy of that spring. And you'll see, I don't know if I can show you. You see this is called the balance wheel, that gold part there. And there's a little, almost like ratchet, that's clicking back and forth as that's swinging. As that balance wheel is swinging back and forth, it's clicking a mechanism. And what that's doing is it's gradually releasing the energy of that spring. And that's what's going through all the gears. So the gears are stepping it down, so it's as close to a second per oscillation or release. It's actually a quarter of a second. So when you look at a mechanical watch and you look at the second hand, you see that it sweeps rather than ticks, and that's because of that sweeping motion. So it's
a quarter of a second.
Yeah,
it's
so
4 movements
4 hertz
per
exactly.
second.
So that's what gives it its sweep. And that balance wheel is regulated. So our assembly team will notch that forwards and backwards to try and get that as balanced as it can to be close to a second, the second, shall I say,
How
per day.
do you stop it moving faster and slower though?
So you're effectively affecting the balance. So you're affecting the way that the balance wheel is coiled. So you're affecting the tension of that coil, and that will speed it up or slow down the way that it's oscillating.
But if you wind it up,
yep.
Is there like a cut-off point where you can keep, because you can keep tensioning it?
You can keep tensioning it, but the gears themselves are holding that together and then releasing that slowly as it oscillates back and forth. So you can't sort of overwind it. It does have a little clutch in it, so you can keep winding, but it won't actually damage the mechanism.
That's really, I've always wondered.
Yeah.
Because battery watches, they operate slightly differently, don't they?
They have a crystal, so it's called a quartz crystal. And that's effectively, the electricity is vibrating that crystal, and that is effectively causing the tick and causing the release, again, of those gears. So when you look at a battery-powered watch, you can always tell because you'll look at that second hand and it will be ticking round, or you might sort of visualize it on a wall clock ticking round compared to that mechanical sweep.
So that's the first difference when you look at a watch. If you've got a mechanical sweep, you know it's an automatic movement.
You know it's a mechanical movement.
Mechanical movement.
The automaticness comes from that spinning rotor.
So I'm learning.
Well, this is one of the amazing things about mechanical watches, I think, is it's a very outdated way of telling the time. Like, you know, there is nothing more accurate than your phone to tell the time. But it's not really about that. It's about the kind of the beauty of that object. And one of the things I quite like is it's not necessarily the most accurate watches that are the most popular. For instance, we regulate our watches to plus or minus 10 seconds a day, which means that it can be slow or fast by up to 10 seconds per day. So it can lose or gain up to 10 seconds a day.
So you could lose a minute a week.
You could lose a minute a week. And that's considered very good.
Is it? But that's like an hour a year almost.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite significant. Yeah. But a lot of watches today, popular mechanical watches, are hand wound as well. And I think, you know, so it's also, in terms of practicality, it's even worse because you leave that for a few days and it will stop. But one of the romantic things about having a product like that is you interact with it every day. You pick it up in the morning, you manually wind it, you can feel the gears, you watch it tick back to life. And that's kind of one of the beauties of it. Even though it's core function, it's definitely not the best at doing. But I love that it's survived all these waves of innovation, and the mechanical watches nearly went under when battery powered quartz watches came in, because of course back in the day when they were first developed, a lot of it was about telling the time as best that you could, because that was the only means to do it. But nowadays it's so much more about expression and telling a story or creativity or beauty.
Yeah, I mean, they are incredibly beautiful things, and it's that classic male stereotype of dressing up like James Bond and wearing a really lovely watch and stuff like that. And you look at these watches, think, that's what I embody. You know, when I'm looking at your watches, I'm thinking, I could be dressed up like James Bond in Cambridge and chase a villain down the river.
There's not a lot of crime in Cambridge. It's not a lot happens really, to be honest. It's quite boring. But yeah, and I think, well, you know, what's also nice is it's thinking about men and women. There's a lot more women that are getting into the industry as well, and like I have two kids. So I have a son and a daughter, as you know, and they're both interested in different ways already, which I quite like. And they're already kind of fascinated by having this thing that has little gears and that you can put on and change the strap and do all these little things too. And I'd say we say about 60-40, 60% men, 40% women.
Do you have a line of watches for?
So I'd say that this one, we don't specifically. We kind of never put a label on it. It's more sort of size and style. This one being slightly smaller and slightly more elegant has been the most popular, I think, because it has those kind of elegant curves. And often women have a smaller wrist, so that does suit.
60-40 is
really
quite surprising.
And I think, yeah, definitely. And I think it's a lot of women that I speak to who are in the watch world, they like this style of watch because, as you can imagine, they're kind of sick of something that is, when you say a feminine watch, it is, it's gold or it's got a pink face or it's got jewels in, and it's kind of a piece of jewelry. Whereas a lot of our customers, they like it because it's bigger. It's more of a statement. It's more of a, making a point of, this is a part of me. This is a bit of my personality to have something a bit bolder.
I mean, that it is a statement. It's not a statement watch as in,
Sure.
Look at me, everybody. But they are quite a statement, but they're kind of understated. It's an elegance rather than a big, bold statement, isn't it? Which I really like, actually. I think
Very true.
I think that's a really smart move, especially with kind of modern, not fashion, but modern elegance and stuff like that. You don't want to be that guy who's got a diamond-studded, massive, great, shiny watch. You want to be able to go like that, and someone go, "Oh yeah, nice."
I think that's
you get the nod,
Yeah, you want the nod. That's what it's all about, is getting the nod. Yeah, I think that's it. And I think, I've always, like I said to you, when I was buying one of my first watches and made this terrible choice of this overtly fashion watch, is I want it to be a product that you look at it again in 10 years, 20 years, and it's still classic and still looks as good and kind of meant to be then as it did when you first bought it. And I think that's where a lot of that's what I love about classic design. And the expression comes from those little details of those pops of colour, rather than, as you say, that sort of very ostentatious, massive, in your face, bejeweled monster.
What's next for Beaucroft?
So, as you can imagine, I've got many, many different designs in my head that we'd love to do. I think just challenging ourselves. We've got a piece out that is very coming out that's very sculptural. It's kind of a lot more. It's almost trying to refine everything that we've done so far and see what's the most sort of sculptural, stripped back, refined version of that I'm quite enjoying exploring. Something super slim, very elegant, maybe something quite different. And also just getting out to meet more people, work. I think after doing this collaboration with Tim, it's inspired me to go and explore other aspects of creativity and to work with other artists. It's such a fun process. And so we've got a few lined up. We've got a lot more shows worldwide, whether it's in the US or in the Far East. So I think trying to find artists in those regions and do something to sort of commemorate those worlds coming together would be very cool.
And if you could design and build a watch, money's no object, time is no object. Have you got a design that you think, that's what I would love to do? A bit like, have you seen the Simpsons advert? The Simpsons episode. the car. Every designer knows the Simpsons episode that I'm talking about. But if you were given like carte blanche, what would you do?
I'd really struggle, I think, actually, to design one thing. Because I don't think I've ever found that one thing. And I think that's what keeps it interesting.
Okay.
Because I think that's what keeps the kind of fire and challenge alive with it, is you design different things to tell different stories and different purposes. And, like when you look at these two watches, for instance, one is an elegant, sort of everyday, super slim and lightweight, whereas this is kind of a go anywhere, do anything. Like you can take this surfing, you can wear it with a suit. It kind of is a companion watch you could take on an adventure. And I think what I like is that buyers are quite complex. You have different, like yourself. You're a big surfer. I think about the work that you do here, but then if you wanted to dress up and go to something in the evening in elegance, there isn't necessarily one watch that suits all of those stories for you. There may be 3 different products that really kind of provide you with what you need for that. So I would really struggle to design just one thing, because I like that kind of.
Could you design 3 things then, like a dress watch, a work watch, and a sports watch? Would you?
Yeah, I would. And I think, I get really inspired by like challenging ourselves on the kind of the forms and the shapes. And I think like if money was no object, I think actually going into the mechanics a little bit, working with someone to design something truly unique way of telling the time. I mean, it'd be extremely expensive, cash hemorrhaging vanity project, but
might be there one
it would be a lot of fun.
And what about, like a sports watch, a diver's watch? Is that on the cards maybe?
Definitely. I mean, we've had a lot of people ask for it. I think you, when you first start out, you design things for yourself, don't you? I think you're your first customer. And so I like to sound kind of elegant every day, especially living in somewhere like Cambridge. It is that kind of elegant place. But then I wanted a watch for if I was going in the sea, going surfing or doing something like that. So that's what kind of led me onto that sports. I'm not a big diver, but I'd love to work with a diver to actually figure out what's important and kind of, because I feel like it's really exciting if you can work with the person that actually does the thing. For instance, we've never done a pilot's watch. Now I can't fly a plane. But if we were to do one, I'd love to work with a pilot or for some pilots to really understand what it is that kind of sparks that for them. Especially when, a lot of pilots' watches were designed during the war, various wars, to accommodate those pilots. So they've got all that history and story and reason for all those little touches. The crown of a dive watch is big, and that's because the pilots back then were wearing big, thick gloves. So they needed something they can control during that point. The same with how it glows in the dark was because of, the changing, flying at night, flying in those sort of high risk sort of undercover raids. They needed something that would illuminate. I always love those little stories and the people behind the watch. So that's what I'd love to do.
That's really interesting. I hadn't really considered that, because you think, of the big watch brands, they all do a dive watch, they all do a pilot's watch. Some are doing sailing watches for sailors as well, which I thought was quite interesting. And it's that aspirational activity, isn't it? That,
it is, yeah.
There's probably plenty of people that buy those watches that have never been diving, never been on a boat, and only go on a plane when they go on a holiday. Hot tub. Certainly don't. They don't fly it.
Definitely.
But they might well be a passenger a good number of times a year. But they'll buy the watch because it's that little piece that they can hold on to that associates in their mind with that adventurous activity or sport or whatever it is. So I hadn't really thought about that, but it comes from a genuine place.
Yeah, if you all of the sort of you're absolutely right. All of the innovations and technologies within mechanical watches have all happened because of a need at the time. The anti-magnetic properties of a watch was all because of the magnetism within a cockpit, right? So if a navigator was genuinely timing themselves as part of understanding how far away from land they were, and that watch stops working in the air, they've got during the First World War, Second World War, they've got no other way of telling the time. That is their whole reliance. So these things are critical. Same with a dive watch. A lot of divers would use it to time how long they'd been underwater for, to give them an indication of how much oxygen they had left in the tank. Yeah. So you need that thing to survive the pressures of, going down a couple of 100 meters. If it doesn't, it could be fairly serious for the wearer. And you're right, nowadays, most dive watches do not go diving. But I love the idea that if we were going to do it, it would be really cool to actually work with someone that might take it diving. Same with pilot, because it's nice to kind of think about, well, what would a modern pilot's watch look like? With a commercial pilot, what does that pilot want from a watch compared to, a Spitfire cockpit?
Comes with a free pair of sunglasses.
Probably, yeah, something like that.
But that is also a really important part of telling the story of the brand. So if you were going to do a diver's watch and you worked with a diver, I mean, if you filmed that entire process, start to finish, the testing, the using of it, and it's that whole relationship between you and that person, that person's then embodying your brand, or they're the ambassador for your brand. You know, if it's someone who's a really well-established diver with a big reach, say on social media, or really well-known or whatever, then it's like like we keep talking about surfing, but it's like sponsoring a surfer. If you find the Kelly Slater a diver and you go, right, let's do a watch together, and they're testing this watch for you and they're wearing it and everything else, then you know what that could do for your brand. Suddenly you're in the forefront of people's minds who are watching the documentary that they're in or following them in the competition or whatever. So it's certainly an exciting prospect, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think that's it. And it's connecting you to someone who lives and breathes that thing. You know, I'm under no illusions that if no divers today really use the dive watch to tell them they have a computer. And you see those funny pictures of this really elegant, sort of mechanical, expensive watch next to the dive computer, which they're actually using to keep them safe. But as you say, like it's about that challenge of designing something to withstand the harshness of that world that person lives in. You're right. There's a British brand called Braymont, who worked with Laird Hamilton to design a piece. Whether or not he actually wears that watch when he goes big wave surfing, I don't know. But you know, the story's there to kind of what would he need that watch to be able to do, and be amazing to work with people like that. So.
I know Breitling are working with Andrew Cotton, the big wave surfer from Devon. Yes. I'm not sure what the relationship is. I wonder if it's, can you wear our watch and we'll take some photos?
This picture on the beach?
Yeah, exactly. Not a bad gig if you can get it, but I wonder how much of that is genuine client feedback. Like, I want to wear this watch when I'm big wave surfing. It needs to be able to do X, Y, and Z. How much of that is, or is it like, I'm wearing a fancy dress watch and you can have my picture in the background? Cotty, I'm sorry if you're watching this. No shade. I think good on you. I wonder how much of it is like that. But I think there's a lot to be said for the genuine interactions between brands and sports people or professionals in their field. It's very honest. Whereas I think if you just go, here you go, wear my watch.
Yeah, definitely. I saw a funny thing recently where it was, a watch publication looking at the Oscars, looking at the red carpet and seeing how many watches were actually set to the right time. And I think it was a few percent of them were actually set to the right time. They were just shoved on the wrist, stylish put on the wrist, and out they went. I'm with you.
That's a real details thing, isn't it? Like, oh, look, they've got the wrong time on. There's a clock in the background, but their watch is 3 o'clock.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's the same with working with Mr. Penfold or Tim on that watch. Was the first watch that we looked at was quite dressy, and I just looked at him for he's not going to wear that. He's not going to be out like spray painting a wall wearing a dress watch on a leather strap. It's got to be something that's got a bit of heft to it, got a bit of weight to it that he can knock about, and it still looks good.
Is that the general rule of thumb? You say a dress watch and a everyday watch. Would you wear a dress watch with a leather strap if you were wearing a suit and going to a black tie then?
Yeah, typically. I mean, I think that's sort of traditionally what you'd have. I think, and a lot of dress watches are time only, and they don't usually have the glow in the dark lume aspects because it's meant to be almost more like a piece of jewelry. So it's more polished surfaces and polished metal, that sort of thing. Whereas a sports watch, it tends to be on a bracelet. Like this one has a scratch-resistant coating, for instance. It has 200 meters water resistance. It has a sapphire crystal. It has a screw-down crown so that it doesn't let water in that way. It has these little things that kind of allow it to work for more sporty occasions. Whereas, if you took that one in the sea, it's finished.
Game over.
It's not going to last very long.
Fine. And I've got a couple of questions about the design as well. I always think this. When you sit down to design a watch, what is your process? Firstly, you talked about your inspiration from Cambridge and things and stuff. I think that's really important. But how do you get that from in here to right there?
So it starts with a lot of scribbles, I'd say.
Pencil and paper?
Yeah, tends to be. And that, I think the nice thing about that, even today with all the, all the technology you have to digitally draw stuff, and I do a lot of digital drawing, if you're just kind of scratching around an idea, maybe you've got an idea for the shape of the hands or that particular curve, or, just looking at that arc of that case, then there's nothing like just a bit of pen and paper just to kind of scribble that curve and kind of get a rough shape down. So a lot of it starts in that way. And, you know, with this one, for instance, the story of it was kind of, we took the curves of that watch when we were out on the river. And I like the idea of it being about flow and kind of flowing through, kind of taking a moment, taking a kind of step back and just kind of enjoying time. So everything is there's no hard lines to that watch. Everything is curved. Everything is kind of sculptural. The hands are kind of very elegant, sort of leaf shapes. There's nothing harsh about it. It's all very continuous. So, and a lot of the early designs were just kind of drawing those curves, trying elongating that a little bit more, trying that, getting kind of the vibe of the watch first. And then what I like to do is kind of go to 2D quite quickly. So having some sort of face-on side views, trying to sort of get something where you can actually measure things and actually kind of put it to scale. You know, simple things like just getting it to scale, sticking it on my phone so that I can look at a few versions of it and seeing what kind of works over time, seeing if there are details that I don't like. Quite quickly then moving to something 3D, so working with CAD. Mainly because like it is such a physical product until you get something, even a 3D printed part in the hand where you can turn it around and you can, you know, weight it with coins or whatever just to allow it to sit on the wrist. That's when it really starts to come to life. That's when you start to spot things that aren't right. You know, the weighting of things, the sizing of things, if things are too dainty or, you know, too chunky. And then it really is a process of just kind of going round that loop and kind of refining details, refining the balance of things, printing things out big and looking at, you know, the composition of things, you know, taking things to scale, and then cutting metal and actually going for a few iteration loops. But one of the steps I enjoy the most is making the first prototypes and making the first, you know, metal parts, getting it on the wrist and then just wearing it for a few weeks because, you know, it's that wrist time. As we were talking about before, it's one of those things where if this is going to sit on someone's wrist for 20, 50 years, hopefully, how much time do you want to give it on any wrist before you launch it? Because, you know, unlike a piece of art, you don't have to understand how that ages and wears over time with an interaction with a person. Whereas a watch, you need to get it on different people's wrists quite quickly and really understand how that balance is sitting, how people are finding winding it, all those sort of things. So there's a lot of getting to something physical quickly and then giving it time to kind of to be explored and challenged.
That seems really long. If you've got to get it on someone's wrist for like 1,000 hours, that seems like that process is a long time.
And you're right. And the truth of the matter is we wouldn't be able to. So it's kind of it's almost accelerating testing it in some ways. Like, you know, if I'm wearing it, I can really kind of age it quite quickly by, you know, just putting it on giving it to my son and it's destroyed within, you know, a few hours. And I think, and you know, as you say, you can't have 1,000 hours put on someone's wrist. So you are aware that once you launch it and get it out there, you know, you wait and see if there are things that need tweaking or refining from having a few hundred out there with their first customers. But I think that's one of the fun things about it is it's so physical and it may look incredible when it's out the box, but what does it look like, you know, a few months later or a few years later?
Or decades.
Importantly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where can people find your watches?
Yeah, so we sell mainly online, but we also have a space in Cambridge. We're part of a place called the Time and Tide Studio. They really champion smaller brands and really showcase a lot of brands that people would not have seen in the metal before. So it's this incredible space in central London where you can come and like kind of dive into the world of smaller brand watches and get hands-on and meet their amazing team. Of course, come and see us in Cambridge. So we currently sell our watches from a gin laboratory.
Wow.
Randomly. So when we launched during the pandemic, by mistake, obviously there were no shows, no events, nowhere for us to show the watches. But thankfully one of our friends runs a distillery. And so he said, well, why don't you come and do a pop-up there? We're still open as sort of an off license. do a pop-up, feed people gin until they buy watches.
There's a lot to be said for
There
that.
is a lot. It works. 3 gin and tonics and sales done, I think. So that kind of became our home for the first few years. We still do private appointments there, so you can come and unwind with whoever you want to bring and explore the watches. But we're also about to open our own space. So we're about to take on our own sort of studio and showroom. So yeah, if anyone ever wants to come to Cambridge, just drop us a line, drop us an email, or give us a call and we'll fix it up.
And you'll be manned there all the time, or will it be appointment?
Yeah, so that will be kind of an appointment only. It'll be our working space. So it'll be where we design, where we box watches. It'll be kind of, you're in the world, you enter the door and you're in the world of Beaucroft. But it's one of those things that we'd love to invite people into that kind of experience. That it's like walking in here today. It's real. Like you're in the mixer. This is where things happen. This isn't put on for effect. This is a real working.
Well, it's cleaned up for effect.
It's cleaned
today.
up for effect, yeah.
Should have said it yesterday.
I think that's the beauty of it, right? People want to enter your world and come and see where the magic happens.
Yeah,
so.
soak it all up.
Yeah.
Really, I think that's a really important thing, because you get the whole atmosphere. You can breathe it in, you can soak it up, you can feel part of it before you make that leap to
definitely
put an order in with us or buy a watch with you. Mm-hmm. That's really good, really good. It's been fantastic to watch your brand grow from a small idea with a friend to watching it become, the brand that it is. You're full-time into it now, and you're making fantastic products and selling fantastic products. So it's obviously working.
Thank you, mate.
One thing that I always ask people when they come on the podcast is, what piece of advice would you give to someone who's just starting off? Maybe they're interested in watches or another aspect of jewelry or anything really, but someone that wants to make something for themselves. What piece of advice would you give them? Is it maybe a piece of advice that you had, or maybe a piece of advice that you wished you'd been given?
I think you sparked in something you said earlier, which is about not being afraid to make mistakes. I think when you start anything on your own, it's a very personal endeavor. You're putting a lot of your personal time, sweat, tears into it. And it's very easy to kind of protect that and keep that very close, not stay curious, not talk to people and get it out there. But it's only when you kind of take the leap and put something out there and take all the criticism and take all the good and the bad where you really learn and grow. So I'd almost say just put something out there and learn from it and make some mistakes, because that's what's made, what we've done has been those mistakes has led us to being in a really good place.
Fantastic. That's similar to what other people say as well. A lot of the time people say, just start.
Yeah.
Make the mistakes, just start. But most people who've started a business that's working say, get out there and make mistakes. So it's interesting to hear it coming again and again and again.
Yeah.
There must be something to it. So anyway, Matt from Beaucroft, thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, buddy.
What a treat for bringing in and showing these beautiful watches. Beaucroft watches. Thanks again. Thank you.